Well, welcome to Christian Answers. This is Pastor Jeff Short. Glad to have you along for today's journey. Today I want to talk about an article that I found in Time Magazine, a recent issue of Time Magazine here. I get Time Magazine every week that comes in, and I try to keep up on what's going on from the secular perspective. Time Magazine is a very secular magazine. I don't actually recommend Time Magazine as a magazine to get your news because it is all so biased and slanted and one-sided to the secular humanistic perspective. And everyone that appears in Time Magazine is pretty much given the blessing of the secular leftism. So what I find interesting is there's an article talking about Russel Moore of the Southern Baptist Convention. And as some of you know, I am a Southern Baptist ordained pastor. I've pastored in many different Southern Baptist churches. I've also pastored in Christian Reformed churches. I've also pastored in a number of other denominational churches. So that isn't a big deal, but I wanted to go over this article by Russel Moore, or the interview that they have with Russel Moore. The article is called "Conservative Christian Russel Moore Has a Message for Believers Who Also Worship Trump." So, as you can see, the bias is really heavy in this magazine article because, first of all, I know of no Christian conservative evangelical who worships Trump. He was a president. He was a candidate. He held platform positions. And he articulated positions on political issues that were very compatible with evangelical Christianity. So nobody worships Trump. So the article begins, "Conservative Christian Russel Moore has a message for believers who also worship Trump." I know of no one like that. Nobody who worships Trump, that's an absurd statement. No Christian worships any candidate. No Christian worships any political figure, let alone Donald Trump. Do we support Donald Trump in his positions? Yes. Do we support all of his positions? No. Do we support most of his political positions? Yes. So Russel Moore, if he's trying to say that people who support Trump worship Trump, or if this article is trying to imply that people who supported Trump worshiped Trump, totally hyperbolic, totally exaggerated, totally lying, actually, misleading, misstatement of fact. Nobody worships Trump. It's absurd to even have that in the headlines, but there it is. And so people have to deal with that. We supported him because he had policies that were compatible with evangelical, Bible-believing Christianity. Okay, that's it. No big deal. Don't try to have to make it into a big deal. And so this article, of course, it's coming from the secular left. It's coming from the humanistic, anti-Christian left. And so you got to wonder, if they showcase an article by a so-called evangelical, why is that article showcased? That article is showcased and that belief is showcased because that so-called evangelical is espousing views that the secular left agrees with. And so they're going to showcase Russel Moore. And what are they going to showcase Russel Moore in this featured article? They're going to showcase him criticizing Christians who supported Trump. Of course, they don't like Trump, so anyone who doesn't like Trump is a friend of theirs. Right now, temporarily. But then next week, if Russel Moore says something they don't like, they'll drop him. So it's just a popularity contest, and we see a lot of evangelicals trying to win the popularity contest because they think that winning popularity in our culture is the same as winning people for Christ. It's not. Anyway, let's get into the article. I'll make some comments on the article. First of all, it says, the past few years have not been an easy time to be God's lobbyist. It says here, a lot of folks claiming to represent the Almighty have been jostling for space in the corridors of Washington with a lot of conflicting agendas. Their methods often seem mutually exclusive with the Christian tenet that we should love one's neighbor. Okay, so from a liberal, secular, humanistic perspective, there's only one thing that Christians believe, I guess, and that is you should love your neighbor as you love yourself. Newsflash, Christianity is a lot more than loving one's neighbor as one loves self. In fact, that is part of the Great Commandment, and it starts off, though, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So you love God first of all. So you follow God, loyalty to God, number one, and then love your neighbor as you love yourself. So you don't start with love your neighbor, you start with love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. So, but the leftist, secular left, they want to forget about the love God stuff because they don't even believe in God. They don't believe that there is a God even. Most of them are either secular atheists or secular agnostic or skeptics or cynics or whatever. They don't believe in God. So they jump to the next of the commandment is love your neighbor as yourself. That's something they can understand because they believe in people. They believe that there are human beings running around the earth. And they say, well, that's the only thing we really are called to do. No, that is the second command. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Number one, loyalty to God, and then love your neighbor as yourself. So that's the right order. Now that is critical that you get that order right, because the reason why we are opposed to abortion is because God says it's murder. God says to take the life of an innocent person is murder. That's wrong. So we follow God. And so, and we also then love our neighbor as ourselves. The unborn baby in the womb is our neighbor. The unborn baby is a small neighbor, a tiny neighbor, and the more immature that baby in the womb is, that's a more immature neighbor, but it's a neighbor nonetheless. So we need to love our neighbor as ourselves. So we don't want to kill the baby in the womb. But the secular left, they forget about all that. They don't want to hear that. Let's go on in the article. So perhaps it's not surprising that shortly after the events of January 6th, the guy whose actual paid job is to try to get those in power to think about a higher power got about so ticked off as a polite Southern gentleman of faith is allowed to get. So they're talking about Russel Moore. He was really mad, all upset about the protest January 6th that got out of hand at the Capitol, where people entered the Capitol. Now, from the secular left, this is, a terrible insurrection, coup attempt. They were trying to overthrow the government. No. Again, hyper language to try to score political points. Nothing like that at all. If you can defend this, you can defend anything, wrote Russel Moore. Defend what? Protests got out of hand? People went into the Capitol unauthorized? People who knows who they were? Antifa? Anarchists? We don't know. I mean, the whole crowd? No. A handful of people did violence. A handful of people vandalized. Most of the people wandering around the Capitol that day were clueless. They weren't there to overthrow the government. They weren't there to plot an insurrection. They weren't there to take over the government. No, they're just trying to get a message across. Now, they did violate the law. They went into a building. They were not supposed to be there, and so they should get fined. They should get penalized. They should be arrested. If they're convicted of something very serious, they should pay jail time even. But no, they were not trying to take over the United States. This is so overblown. It's ridiculous. So Russel Moore, he's all upset because he's feeding into his mind the mainstream media narrative. He buys right into that. Russel Moore, a theologian who is also president of the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission, ERLC, of the Southern Baptist Convention, in an excoriating editorial to his fellow evangelicals about the breach of the Capitol. The intruders displayed Jesus Saves signs next to those calling for the hanging of Vice President Pence. And once in the building, thank God for the opportunity to get rid of the communists, the globalists, and the traitors within the U.S. government. If you can wave this away with, well, what about, added Moore, then where at long last is your limit? Well, first of all, again, there were extremists and there were anarchists and there were actually Antifa people planted in the crowd that were egging on just normal people, and normal people caught up in a crowd, caught up in a mob, went on in and were acting stupid. Yeah, so find them for being dumb. Find them for being stupid. They certainly didn't speak for Christianity. They didn't speak for Bible-believing evangelicals. And we don't have to spend all our time apologizing to the secular world for people acting dumb and doing what they shouldn't have been doing. But this doesn't in any way say that all Christians who supported Trump are just like this, and this will set back Christianity for decades and all this hyperbolic speech. No. It's nothing at all as complicated as that. Many Christian leaders and thinkers decried the attack on the Capitol. Attack on the Capitol. Again, if this was an attack, it was the dumbest, stupidest, weakest attack you could ever imagine. But few went as far as Moore. He laid the blame squarely at the feet of the many evangelicals, believers, who to be their hero, President Donald Trump. So he blames the Trump supporters for the attack at the Capitol, and he blames President Donald Trump for the attack at the Capitol. Trump said, we peacefully make our voices heard, and some anarchists and some Antifa people and some kooks and crazies went overboard, but Trump didn't instigate anything other than a protest. But Russel Moore, evidently, he wants to buy into that leftist secularist narrative because I guess that gets him a place in Time magazine. I don't actually know what his motives are. It says, this week we watched an insurrection of domestic terrorists, Moore wrote, which is totally hyperbolic. Merited and fomented by the President of the United States. So he's going to blame President Donald Trump and all the Trump supporters and all the evangelicals for Trump. He's going to blame everybody. When asked about that statement during an interview from his book-lined residence in Tennessee, home office a week later, he doubles down. He called them for a rally, Trump. He told them that the future of the country was at stake. It was, right? It was. We're seeing that now. Secularists and socialists are actually in charge right now. So, yes, he's right. Trump is right. And that the election had been stolen from them. Yes, it had. As far as we can understand the evidence that has been supported of the election fraud, it was true that the election was stolen. And that the weakness could not be an answer. That weakness could not be an answer. No, we had to strongly voice our voice. And most of the 99.999% of all the people there at the rally did do that. They voiced their voice. A small band of kooky people who we don't even know all of who were there. Although we do know Antifa was there stirring up trouble. We know there were anarchists there. There were weird, wacko, mentally ill people, shamans, whatever. You know, a whole hodgepodge of people. It wasn't a Christian rally for Trump. It was a mixture of all kinds of people. So, no, there's nothing to apologize for. And after the attack took place, again, hyperbolic language, with our vice president under siege, no, that's false also. With people calling for him to be executed. Who? How many? Out of the 500,000 people in Washington, D.C. that day, how many called for him to be executed? And who actually believed that that was a literal statement? Russel Moore is taking that literally, like, oh yeah, they were trying to find the vice president to kill him. No. The president continued the attack on vice president on Twitter because he felt Mike Pence did not do all that he could do to try to bring out the truth that this election had not been investigated, the voting had not been investigated, and I'm for one, think that there needs to be a congressional investigation into the 2020 election. What's wrong with that? Instead of sweeping it under the rug, like a lot of the Republicans did, and I guess they wanted to distance themselves from people who were calling for an investigation. I don't know why. Why would that be such a bad thing, to have an investigation on the 2020 election? Why would that be bad? In criticizing President Trump, Moore has diverged from such influential evangelicals as Franklin Graham, who compared the Republicans who voted for Trump's second impeachment to Judas Iscariot. Jerry Falwell Jr., who said he'd given Trump a third honorary degree if he were still leading Liberty University, and author Eric Metaxas, who devoted almost his entire Twitter feed after the election to increasingly bizarre and implausible conspiracy theories on the method by which it was stolen. Well, that's debatable about whether they're implausible and whether they're conspiracy theories. If you're unwilling to investigate questions that arise about the election, and if you call people who raise those questions conspiracy theorists, then Eric Metaxas, yes, was a conspiracy theorist, but that's not what a conspiracy theorist is. When you raise questions about a presidential election because there is enough evidence to justify those questions, that is not conspiracy. That is wanting to get to the bottom of the truth. And we need to get to the bottom of the truth before the next presidential election, or why vote? If you can't really believe that the election is done fair and free, if you are ignored and are dismissed as a conspiracy theory for raising the question, then what good is voting in an election? And this has to be settled before the next 4 years rolls around. Because I, for one, don't feel confident that my vote will count unless there is some kind of investigation and possible reform of the elections laws. Because last 2020 election was a mess. It was a chaotic. There was no order to it. Every state had the opportunity to change all of its laws the last moment if they wanted to. There was such sloppiness and loose regulations about who voted and when they could vote and so forth. It was a mess, and it needs to change. And if you want to call it a conspiracy theory, go right ahead. But I think normal citizens want to get to the bottom of that, and it's not a conspiracy theorist, Russel Moore. Moore's positions differ from even the guy tipped to be the next head of the Southern Baptist Convention, the Reverend Albert Mohler, who voted for Trump in the 2020 and said, even after the events at the Capitol, that he'd do it again. So, yeah, Albert Mohler says, no, I don't apologize for voting the way I did. But Russel Moore, I guess, doesn't seem to have anything to do with that. It's been lonely, and he talks about, he's feeling sorry for himself. He says it's been lonely to be against Trump when so many fellow evangelicals are for Trump. Yeah, I could understand that Russel Moore is feeling lonely. But here's the thing. I think the collective body of Christ in the Bible-believing Christian world was right in overwhelmingly supporting President Donald Trump. And I think that Russel Moore was overwhelmingly wrong, and some of his other fellow never-Trumpers were wrong in rejecting a candidate because they didn't like his tweets, or they didn't like his personality, or they didn't like this or that about him as a person. But if you look at the actual political platform that the Republican Party and Donald Trump ran for, it's actually solid. And you really, compared to the Democratic platform, no question. Hands down, Republican platform, sound, solid, you vote for it. You don't let a personality of a candidate, or you don't let the tweets of a candidate or some of these other secondary side issues take away the focus. Look, we have to hold back a secular, abortion, transgender, gay rights agenda. We have to hold that back, and the best way to do it is to elect a Republican candidate. In the 2020 election, the Republican candidate was Donald Trump. And so it would have been so easy for Russel Moore to just simply said, look, I don't like everything about Trump, but boom, I'm going to vote for him because he's the best thing to hold back this entire secular humanistic overthrow of our government. No, he didn't do that. He wants to be friends with the world, and he thinks that the best way to win the world to Jesus Christ is to be friendly to the world. Even if that world is trying to destroy the Christian church, take away religious liberties, promote abortion, promote gay rights, promote transgender rights, all these negative, harmful things, he thinks, well, still the best way to win the world for Jesus is to be friendly with the world. Well, you have to, in the first great commandment, love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. That's the first commandment. So you've got to do that first. You've got to put your faith in God, and you've got to commit yourself to the love of God first. And then secondarily, you fit the love of self and the love of neighbor in with the love of God. And you do it in that order. And Russel Moore doesn't seem to have that order right. He kind of thinks that the best way to win people to God is to love those people, and I guess let the church fall apart, let the culture fall down, break down, and come to ruin. But as long as you're agreeing with the culture, they're going to think you're cool. No, that's not how the world is won for Jesus. You stick to the truth, and if it wins you enemies, it makes you enemies, well, you just put up with that the best you can. So Russel Moore talks about, he claims that he's a dyed-in-the-wool social conservative. Not true, not true. On the issues, for example, of the so-called social justice issues, he's perfectly willing to divide the body of Christ and support radical groups like Black Lives Matter and the Antifa riots. And he all thinks, well, that's needed because there's systemic racism in our culture, and that there's white supremacy. He's all concerned about white nationalism. All these fake labels that are put on society by the radical left, Russel Moore just adopts those, and he just assumes those. And he thinks that, hey, this is, as a church, we need to embrace all of these radical leftist social justice issues to show the world that we really care. No, the best thing we can do as a church is to stand up against these fake justice issues. It is not true, factually true, it is not factually true that there is systemic racism in this nation. You would be hard-pressed to actually identify and find a racist in this society today in 2021. Now, if you go back 100 years, no question you would. If you go back 60 years, there's no question you would. In certain specific geographical areas, especially in our country, you would find them. Today, very difficult to find an actual case of racism. The same way with the police. The police are not, contrary to what Russel Moore and Black Lives Matter and the social justice warrior woke crowd thinks, it is very difficult to find an actual racist cop. Policemen are not out there looking for black people to shoot and kill. No. False narrative, false signals. This is a false justice issue. There is no systemic racism in this country. So Russel Moore and people like him are pushing a false secular narrative and bringing it into the church and dividing the church. And so really what they need to do is just stop following the secular left. Stop following the mainstream media narrative. The reason why Russel Moore is showcased in Time magazine is because he's saying exactly what they're saying on this issue. And the reason he is so much against Donald Trump is because the left hates Donald Trump and he wants the left to like him. And he thinks the best way the church can get the secular left to like them is to agree with them, which is a false strategy. Even if you like what they like, they will turn against you. Even if you agree with them and try to be so agreeable and so submissive to the radical left, they will still hate you. There's nothing you can do to satisfy the radical left. And so you need to just stop trying to play that game, and you need to just look at things from a biblical perspective and say, yes, racism is bad, but there is not systemic racism in this country, and we're not going to apologize, and we're not going to confess sins that we haven't committed. We're going to confess sins we have committed. We don't worship Donald Trump, contrary to Russel Moore and the Never Trumpers claim. And we don't apologize for voting for a man who stands with evangelicals for religious freedom, against abortion, against transgenderism, against the destruction of the family, against the confusion of the genders with the LGBTQ revolution junk. We stand with anyone who will stand with us. And Trump stood with us. Does that mean we endorse everything he does, everything he says? No. And we will criticize him when he needs to be criticized. But Russel Moore's attack on Trump and his followers are totally out of line. And so we need to be aware of people like Russel Moore. Russel Moore is not an honest person. He is not criticizing actual criticisms of Christians who support people like Donald Trump. No, he is unfair in his criticism. And so we need to be aware of people like this. There are others in the evangelical world who take the position of Russel Moore, and we need to be aware of them and not fall for their lies. Well, I hope this has been a commentary helpful to you. We'll see you back next week on another edition. God bless.